Created by Wes Craven in 1984, Fred Krueger made his debut in A Nightmare on Elm Street. As the malevolent spirit of a child killer who had been burned to death, Robert Englund took on the pivotal role as Krueger goes on to murder his victims in their dreams, causing their deaths in the real world as well. The film became a hit and went on to spawn many sequels, but it's part 3, in my belief, that is the quintessential 80s horror film, and we'll discuss why today on Short Notice Horror.
God.
This is God.
Everyone has their nostalgic points. It doesn't matter what it's music or art or whatever it happens to be, but everybody has their nostalgia. You talk about the 80s and everyone thinks Back to the Future, Gremlins, whatever it happens to be, Splash. Everybody's got something that defines a particular time for them. With Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors, I think it's the pinnacle of the series, in my opinion, but I also think it defines the 80s, and especially 80s horror. Now, when the plot picks up from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, it doesn't have a direct connection to it. It sort of leaves that film behind, which is understandable because obviously it has a history of not being a favourite in the franchise. It's not one of my favourites. I don't think it's a bad film, but it doesn't really take anything away and moving into the plot for Part 3. It sort of opens it up to a brand new set of characters, which is really a smart thing to do. We have Kristen, who's played by Patricia Arquette, and she's obviously been having bad dreams. Now we as the audience know what those dreams are, and her mum doesn't really know what's going on, so she gets admitted to a psychiatric hospital, along with some other troubled teens. Now, as the plot transpires, everybody knows, you've seen it, if you're watching this, you know the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street, but all the kids are seeing the same things. So it's much more related to what happens in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, and they're all being tortured by Freddy in their dreams, and it sort of transpires there's a bit more to it than that. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 is not to be diminished in any way. It's a fantastic horror film. A brilliant horror film that introduces to an iconic character that persisted for many years, and hopefully we might see it a revitalization, but at the minute obviously there's no movement in that. But Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 was an introduction to a character and is a deadly, straight-laced, serious film, and much like a lot of Wes Craven's work until he sort of hit the Scream movies, you know, it's very clever, it's very well made, and it's very well done, and it has a unique idea. Moving into Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, this is what I feel is what makes it iconic. It's like an 80s MTV music video, and it sort of takes a lot of influence from that. I mean, even the music video by the rock band Dokken, I mean, it looks identical as far as who shot it. I mean, maybe the director of the movie shot the film or shot the music video. I'm not quite sure about that, but it's possible. But it looks really cinematic, and it looks like it's part of Freddy's world. And the film in turn was very influenced, in my eyes, very influenced by what was going on in the 80s. Now, it really benefits from bringing back Heather Langenkamp's character of Nancy. Now, when she comes back, I can really buy her as a survivor of the events of Part 1. And even though she's only a couple of years older, she sells it a lot better. You can believe that she went on to be a doctor or a psychiatrist because of the events of what happened. It like formed her adult life. And it makes sense that she would come back in to help these kids, because really and truly she's the only one that knows what's going on. Now, the director, Chuck Russell, brings brilliant visual flair to this film. It rattles along. It's like set piece after set piece after set piece all the young actors, you can buy them as teenagers, and they play their parts really well. Even Kincaid, who's maybe not the best of the bunch, but is a really lovable character, and everyone plays their part well, as I've said. Craig Wasson, who plays Neil in the film. I had only previously seen him in Brian De Palma's Body Double, and I really liked him as an actor. I mean, obviously this was after the fact, not when he came out as Dead Wee when the film came out. I was only a kid. But he plays the part really well, and it's great for Nancy to have like a love interest, even though it doesn't go that far. It's great to have the love interest. I truly believe that Robert Englund came into his own here as Freddy. This was the Freddy that everyone would become to know. He became a pop culture icon, much similar in the way that Art the Clown has now for the Terrifier films. This film was pivotal in Freddy moving into the mainstream, even though it was still a very straight horror film. And this is where Freddy's more of his characteristics started coming out. There were one-liners, but they weren't as cheesy as what they'd become in like Freddy's Dead, and even the subsequent films after this, 4 and 5 as well. It started to become more a comedic character, and the evil side of Freddy was falling away bit by bit as the films went on. But here it was like, for me, as the definitive Freddy. He was still an evil bastard, and he still had his little one-liners, very many of them in this film, which are famous, and a lot of you know. They've been printed on t-shirts and everything. And it's where the kills became really creative, and they didn't come over the top. Like there's elements of 4 and 5 where things were really over the top, like the cockroach and things like that. I understand their dreams, but in this one it became more creative and not just there for the sake of it. I mean, the effects guys was Mark Shostrom and Kevin Yeager. I know Mark Shostrom worked in the Evil Dead movies, amongst many other things, as well as Kevin Yeager, who went on to I think, direct Hellraiser Bloodline, and maybe take his name off it. But these guys were like part of that 80s creative explosion, you know, with Rob Bottin, what he did in The Thing, and then obviously there was his work in The Howling as well, and RoboCop, and you could really tell that the money was being put into it. And New Line was really, really behind the character of Freddy, and they wanted to push it, yes, to make money, but it seemed like they were also still had that level of independence for their filmmakers, and you could tell people were going crazy between fucking heads coming out of TVs and whatever it happened to be. And even the dream sequences themselves, you could tell, the dream sequences themselves, you could tell there was more budget into it, there was more thought and more creativity. You know, from the neon-soaked alleyways when the punk sort of fight happens with the drug addict, to the kid in the wheelchair becoming the wizard and the Dungeons and Dragons aspect. It just seemed like there was more scope for the film, but still totally locked into that 80s look. There's a gloss about this film that the first two films didn't have. They try to emulate it in The Dream Master. Not so much The Dream Child, because personally that's the worst of them all for me. It's even worse than Freddy's Dead. It's so fucking boring. But they try to emulate it in A Dream Master Part 4, and obviously carry over story from Part 3, make it like a direct sequel. It wasn't as successful, but I still do enjoy that film. And as I said earlier, while the first film remains a fantastic introduction to Freddy Krueger as a character, and to the horrors that he brings to children in their sleep and young teens in their sleep, Dream Warriors fine-tuned that idea and brought it to the masses. After its release, as I mentioned, he became like a pop culture icon, and by the time this had really hit, it was quite a big hit, and everyone knew who Freddy was. And it wasn't just the horror fans like us that were heading to the cinema to see these, like everyone was heading to see these films. And also giving Freddy a backstory, and what a backstory. I mean, being the bastard son of 100 maniacs, or 1,000 maniacs, 100 or 1,000, they keep changing during the film. But I believe it's 100 in this, with his mother obviously showing up as the ghost of a nun. You still never show any or feel any sympathy for Freddy Krueger. He's still such an evil bastard that despite that, you go like, well, now I know how he is the way he is. But you just don't feel any sympathy for him. And again, it brings more of that character arc to why he is such an evil fucker. And I really like that introduction, and also being a nun and thing, you know, it's very 80s, like a nun and, you know, 1,000 Maniacs, even though it's very dark, it's sort of cool, you know. And bringing back Heather Langenkamp, as I mentioned, that was just genius. She's got a better command of the character and fits right back in. She's ready and willing to bring the Nancy boot of destruction down on Freddy, and as I said, she could be the only one that knows exactly what it is and know how to kill him. She's killed him before, not kill him, defeat him, and know how to defeat him, as she's defeated him before. And Heather Langenkamp is much better in this film than she was in the first. I mean, she was very young in the first, and not much older here, but she's got more command of the character, and I think she does a brilliant job. And the resolution of the film is really the only way it could have ended, but she makes sure that she brings the fight before inevitably what happens. So yeah, I think for me, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 Dream Warriors is the quintessential Nightmare movie. Huge fan of the first. I'm a huge fan of various other ones in the franchise, but Part 3 solidifies for me that it's almost the perfect 80s horror film. It has everything you want. It's got massive 80s hairdos courtesy of Heather Langenkamp. It's got a great soundtrack. It's got great direction, and I do think the script is really strong. And I think that's probably something to do with the input of Frank Darabont, who's always been a great writer. But yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. Interested to know what you think. Does you have a personal Nightmare movie that's your favourite? What means the most to you? And does maybe watching a particular film in the series conjure up, like, you know, images of when you were a kid when you seen these films? Understandably, that's why the nostalgia sticks with you. For this, Nightmare 3, and that's what does it for me. So please leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe. I'm trying to do as many videos as I can, and I thought this would just be a bit of fun. I'm introducing my son to the Nightmare movies, and I was like, Jesus, I can't wait to get the Nightmare 3 to see what he thinks of it, you know. So really enjoyable, really good flick, love it, personal favourite, 80s all the way for this particular movie. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you come back to watch the other videos I do, and sleep well. Cheers.